Episode of Teacher Prep with Dr. D. Tonight, our special guest is Dr. Sonalina, and she is a consultant and also USC graduate. So exciting to have another Trojan in the house. She's here to talk to us about everything related to motivation. And Dr. Sonalina, it is wonderful to have you with us in the studio tonight. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Dr. Dickinson. It is so good to spend this evening with you and your students. I'm so looking forward to this.
Absolutely. I'm always getting questions about motivation, especially when it is in relation to the middle school grades, because as you know, that is like you are either a middle school teacher or you're not. And I know you've got a ton of experience working with middle schoolers. So let's hear a little bit about your background before we get started in our presentation.
Well, I graduated from USC, but during the time I was at USC, that was actually when I started to work in classrooms as volunteers, either in a voluntary role or as a tutor. And then I started tutoring kids in the neighborhood around USC privately. And that's when I just knew I was meant to go into teaching, into education, and switch my major from pre-med to the Rossier School of Ed to go into teaching. Yeah, my parents were really happy about that one. There's just nothing else I was designed to do. Like, this has been the best fit for me. And so I ended up going into a number of urban schools to teach exactly before I left the classroom to start doing more teacher coaching, and then now school consulting. So middle school is basically where I live right now. A lot of my time is spent in 4 different middle schools, at least 4 different middle schools. And my goal is to work in 8 different areas of each middle school to help them kind of streamline what they are doing so that students learn, and student achievement is high. And in order for that to happen, student motivation has to increase. So motivation to me is everything. It's the backbone to anything we do with kids.
Absolutely. And I know there's a big push going on in SEL, social emotional learning.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So it's great to hear that, you also considering motivation, because I would say I'm definitely hearing from teacher candidates that it's been a really challenging year to motivate students. They were out of the schools for over almost 2 years. You have 6th and 7th graders or 8th graders now that their last experiences in the school was when they were elementary students, right? Yep. So how do you motivate kiddos when you really need to reteach them about how to actually be in the classroom and engaged in learning?
Right. And that has been the trick for everyone this year. This, I think, is probably the longest school year of our lives so far. But who better to help us walk this journey than Elle Woods? I'm sure many of us are familiar with who she is and how she came from that movie Legally Blonde. But the key is in order to get kids motivated, we need to shift their motivational mindset. They're motivated by different things. So as we can see in the picture where she's in the pink and she's got her dog, she was motivated by an external factor. She was motivated to go to Harvard Law, to grab the guy that she wanted and be married to him, versus going there to learn, right? And a lot of our kids come to school because they're either told to, or that's where their friends are, or maybe there's maybe 1 or 2 things they like doing there, or maybe they like their teacher, maybe they like you, maybe you're the reason they come, which is a great reason. But eventually we want them to shift to that desire to learn and go to school for the joy of learning. And so we're going to dive into this now. Now, before we talk more about how to shift that motivational mindset, there are 5 rules that we need to live by. Here's the first one. You are extremely influential. So as much as you think you are influential or not, even if you believe, I'm highly influential in the lives of my kids, you are even more so influential than that. sometimes you just never know. It's not often that they come to you and say, hey, you really changed my life. But as you're there in front of those kids, you have to understand and you have to acknowledge that you are changing their lives. And so the next rule is that relationships and trust are everything. So when I started my teaching career at a middle school around USC, it was called Fauché Learning Center. I had a teacher who mentored me. And one of the things he said to me was, if you can get them to trust you, they will do anything for you. Like they will work as hard as you want them to work. And he was right. Relationships and trust are everything. The next rule that we want to live by is respect can mend the hardness and sharp edges. So I worked in mostly urban schools my entire teaching career. And I mostly worked in urban schools that were in highly active gang areas. And so I had a number of students who either were in gangs when they were in my classroom, or they had parents who were in gangs, or they were just surrounded by that dynamic in their community. And so they were just raised to be tough because it was required. But in the classroom, we have a different set of expectations where we want everyone to be respectful and engage in learning and, the golden rule and all that. So respect is basically that silver bullet that you can use in order to start shifting the mindset. So you're not there to fight them, not there to fight you. You're basically there to be their motivator and their coach. The next rule is intentionality and strategy will drive your students effectively towards success. I had a teacher in the next classroom next to me in one of the schools where I taught. This was an elementary school, so this is when I taught elementary. And she would always have these students come to her who seemed to be classified as having oppositional defiant disorder or being diagnosed with that. And what she would do is she patiently would try these different strategies that she had researched the night before. And then eventually over time, we came to see these different outcomes in the behavior of her students, the emotions that they exhibited during the day, and also just their motivation to get their work done. And the last rule is patience. Oftentimes, you won't know the good fruit that you are sowing until 2 years later. You won't see the fruit of your efforts because it takes time for students to make that shift. And then once they've made that shift, it takes time to see quality fruit grow from it. So be patient. MGO, not OMG, but MGO, as in mastery goal orientation versus performance goal orientation. Now, when I what these two forms of motivation are, a lot of you are going to start naming kids in your head. Oh, that student probably has more mastery goal orientation, or this student probably has more performance goal orientation. And that's exactly what we want you to do. We want you to start thinking about this from the lens of the classroom teacher, and think about this in terms of your students and their needs. So we were told before that children are a blank slate, right? Tabula rasa. They come to us empty and we have to fill them up. But really, that's not the case. That's what we were told back in the day. What we do know is that they actually have a lot of knowledge of their own. We just need to ignite them with the fire that's already within. And so as you can see in this graphic, we have a student who is playing soccer and he's sweating, but in his mind, thought bubble that's coming out of his head is a happy face. He's there for the of playing. He's exerting himself, and he's just not going to quit because he's having so much fun putting forth the effort. And then next to him, we see a student with a thought bubble who's thinking about the championship trophy. Now he is playing with a lot more stress because he's not in it just for the joy of playing. He's in it to outperform other people and to compete. So in the long run, what we found is that intrinsically motivated students actually outperform the extrinsically motivated students because they don't really championship trophy that they're looking at. They basically are looking at beating their last best goal. So if we have a student who took a math test and they were able to compose and decompose numbers with mastery, and they weren't able to do that before, they're excited. That's pumped them up. They are going to set their next math goal. And even though that student might be below grade level, because they're intrinsically motivated, they just want to keep going and see how far they can get. And they're just doing it because they're excited about the fact that they've grown in some way. And so I'm sure you can see this slide. They're motivated to learn what is being presented to them. And they're also motivated to learn outside of what's being presented to them. They know that practice and effort only help them improve. They often check themselves to see how well they're doing at their learning. They're not afraid to seek out challenges, and they're not afraid to ask for help. They don't often see the adults and teachers and parents as being the enemy. They see us as being a support system, and they're not afraid to say, they're not afraid of their own failures.
Right.
And so
it's like that growth mindset piece, right? They just have that naturally, right? Because I think teachers are aware of the growth mindset phenomenon, but you're saying these kids are intrinsically motivated, so they're already coming in with that mindset. Am I correct?
Yes, okay. That's absolutely it. So they already have that growth mindset. And if they don't have that growth mindset yet, we can help them develop that so that they come to enjoy having a growth mindset more so than working for some reward that is externally motivated.
Now, does it shift in terms of like a subject specific area? Because some kids might be intrinsically motivated in math versus English language arts. So is it subject specific?
It can be, definitely. We have students that are definitely excited about math and science, but when it comes to writing that paper in English, they just don't want to do it. It's just hard. I'm like, a pre-writing activity? Are you kidding me? Give me the CPM book, and so we do have that. And so oftentimes our students don't often live in one category or another. We're all intrinsically motivated by certain things, and we're all extrinsically motivated when it comes to certain areas as well. When it comes to updating and posting on social media, that just doesn't do it for me. I'm not that, intrinsically motivated to go on Facebook as often as some of my friends. But when it comes to getting together and planning an event that's focused on like handing out backpacks to different schools, I'm like, I'm all about that. Like, I'll be the event planner and I'll have a great time doing it. And so here are some of the traits that extrinsically motivated students will often have. And as you glance at this, you might find a couple things that really stand out to you about your kids.
I mean, who doesn't want to hear positive feedback? I always get excited when I get an email from one of my students saying how much they enjoyed my course.
That's wonderful, right? But and at the same time, it's also, they were intrinsically motivated in your course, right? So they were learning, and that's why, they just have this overflow of gratitude, and, that's what you're seeing. And so, that impact is huge. And so oftentimes our extrinsically motivated students aren't really thinking so much about the altruistic impact as much as they are about, okay, as long as everyone else knows I'm smart, I'm okay. Or as long as I'm not the squeaky wheel, I'm okay.
So they're seeking approval more so than, if you could go back for a second, because I also wanted to comment on
Sure.
another thing. It's more about their own ego, right?
Yes.
Than actually feeling like they did something positive. Like you were saying, like you like to hand out backpacks because that's part of what motivates you to do what you're doing every day. And
Mhm.
it's not just for your own ego to post on Facebook to say, hey everyone, I handed out
Mhm.
like 300 backpacks,
Right.
I'm that
Yeah.
person.
I don't think I've even ever posted about that on Facebook. So yeah, you're absolutely right. So,
I'm just like, in
yeah.
that space is really kind of important because so many of our kids now, they're spending so much time on social media. They're on
Mhm.
Snapchat, they're on Insta, what have you. And so a lot of times you're seeing certain behaviors as a
Right.
result of wanting to get that
Mhm.
um, that attention, right? Or
Right.
that recognition.
Right.
I was also curious about number 11 because that sees teacher and parents as
Mhm.
judges, punish, and rewarders,
Mhm.
which would make me think that this person has kind of this external locus of control, right? They're not able
Right.
to kind of reflect and say, maybe it's because I didn't study on my test, or maybe it was
Mhm.
because I'm, disruptive in class that the
Mhm.
teacher is punishing me. So how does the teacher kind of flip the script so that the students are able to own that space and own their outcomes?
Right. So with that, I'm going to take us to a different bubble then.
Okay, I'm sorry. No, I
No,
want you
no, no. No,
to.
that's totally fine. So this is their life, right? They're just completely surrounded by all these other factors, including social media. So one way, the first step as teachers, our job is to kind of call people into their potential. And so um, just flat out tell them, hey, we're a classroom full of scholars. And as scholars, these are the traits and characteristics that we possess. And what I would often do is I tell them what those scholarly traits were. I'd have visuals to go with them and I'd put them up in my classroom. And so that way, when students come in, they see it. It's on the wall, it's there every day. But if it just lives on the wall, it's ineffective. It has to then be embedded into instruction. And so if we're working on, we're doing a lesson and it's an inquiry-based lesson. So, a graphic organizer, advanced organizer, group investigation, whichever lesson model I'm going to use, what I'll say is, well, scholars ask questions, right? It's up there, it's on the wall. It's like, we've talked about this before. This is something we've used before. So today, as scholars, we are going to ask a lot of investigative questions that fuel our research. And so definitely define what those scholarly traits are for your students or that you want for your classroom, and then embed it within your lessons throughout the week. And oftentimes, before their kids will know it so well that you'll be teaching a lesson and ready to start, and they'll say, okay, well, what else do scholars do? We're about to tackle this math skill that was really hard for a lot of us. And you might have one student raise their hand and say, scholars persevere, because they will know it. It will just be ingrained. And so as a classroom, they know that they ask questions, they persevere, they use teamwork, that when they learn something, they're not afraid to go back and research. And so there are a number of things that we do as scholars, and you can take some time to identify what you want those to be for your classroom.
Right. I love that because it's shifting the focus from
Mhm.
the teacher having
Yes.
the teacher acting out or the teacher giving feedback, whatever, into like having them own the behaviors, the mindset, the goals that they need to have to be successful,
Yes.
which can then get them to self-reflect, right?
Yes.
And adopt these types of practices.
Absolutely. Yes.
Heavy
Yeah. And that's
stuff, but
definitely what we
I love it.
that's embedded within growth mindset, right? So like of course we want to live there. And of course SMART goals, I know Dr. D, you love these. So here's a way, if you have any teachers that are teaching in elementary school or even the lower grades, you can still use SMART goals with a kindergartner. You just need to scaffold how you talk about the SMART goals. If you say specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, timely, they'll just be like, huh? So what I do, my formula is, let's just choose one skill and then let's decide one goal for that skill. And by what day do you want to do this? And so that is something I would do with my students. When they come in on Mondays, that would be like or even if they come in on a Tuesday, the Monday off, that would be one of the first things we would do to get started in the week is, what is our goal for this week for each student? And then on Friday, you give them time to review what those goals are. There are times when I've sent that particular practice home, like go talk to your family about the goals. And oftentimes, sometimes kids will have parents and people at home who can support them in those goal setting activities. And sometimes they have people at home who don't quite know how to do that yet. And so when it comes to sending goals home, I usually try to coach families either at back to school night or at some point at the beginning of the year. And here's something I've created for parents. And I have this in a number of different areas that your teachers can download and start using if they want to go ahead and do this. These are just some statements that parents can use with their kiddos at home. And then at the bottom, there's a link if they're interested in learning how to motivate their kids at home. I have a parenting class, and then there's the QR code for that as well. And so some of the things that parents can say are, mistakes are a part of learning. Just beat what you did last time. You don't need to be perfect. I'm proud of you for blah, 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 and so it's just a helpful tool, and, stick it on your refrigerator and, they can use it whenever they see it.
I love that, because I think we get so programmed in our society to just focus on the negativity that as adults, we're not even self-aware of some of the messages that we're passing on. And then we wonder why, the student, or our children or our students, what have you, have a certain mindset that they've adopted without really thinking about our own self and our own behaviors.
And that's absolutely right. Self-reflection is key. It drives more than just our kids.
I'm always thinking about this, like on the bigger scale of, because so often schools and classrooms come under the microscope and people are very quick to criticize.
Yes.
But how often do we look back and think about, well, what's happening in our society right now? And what are the kids seeing? Whether, I was in the classroom this week and the big conversation was about Will Smith smacking Chris Rock in the face. That's, kids wanted to talk about it, And the week before that, it was about Ukraine. So, they're definitely getting a lot of messages from outside of our classroom that influence their behaviors when they are in our classroom.
Yeah, and that's absolutely right. And what's unfortunate is I've been in quite a few adult circles too since last Sunday, and a lot of adults are talking about Will Smith hitting the other actor on the stage, and I'm just like, oh my goodness, like there's so many bigger things happening right now. Like, are we talking about this? And so another thing we want to do to kind of keep them on that shift to growth mindset and that focus on moving with momentum, using their motivation, is to celebrate. And at first, especially when you have students that aren't coming from super verbally positive backgrounds, celebrating the goals and successes of each other and training them to do that. So even if they don't have a goal or success, maybe they can celebrate their partner's goal or success in the classroom, or the goal or success of another group in the class. Moments of persistence, like that was so great how Javier, you didn't quit, and then praising each other's the process that people are taking or the effort that people are putting forth. And, even if it's the PE, like, oh, I know you were tired, but you kept running. That was really good.
Right.
And then also when you're really struggling to get them started and get it consistent, I would oftentimes have my kids encourage the way they encouraged each other, like praise the way they encouraged each other. Like, that was really nice what you said to so-and-so. So it's just create a praise space as much as you can. And then who those students are that really do need to benefit from deeper reflection.
Right.
And so when I taught middle school, I had a section of my classroom. I also did this in elementary school. It was called the Reflection Center. And so if anyone was having like an off day, because, in middle school, emotions are everywhere. And so they can go and sit at the Reflection Center and they could journal, just do a quick write about something, write somebody a note that is positive in some way. And I'll usually come by and I'll check on them. Say, hey, are you okay? Do you need to talk about anything really quick? I'm going to get the class started and I'll come back, and so just to kind of have that like space for them to process things. And oftentimes with those kids, it comes back to what they believe about themselves. So it's all about self-efficacy, right? It's either what someone else told them they should think about themselves, or a situation told them they should think about themselves, or what social media says they should think about themselves, unfortunately. And so sometimes deeper work is necessary, and you don't have to be a trained psychologist to do it. It is good when students do good counseling, but oftentimes if it's something that needs to go deeper, just giving them the space to begin processing that is helpful. And so
giving them an opportunity to reflect. Let's say you have a kid that's coming in and he's just right off the bat, like off the chart, disruptive, not getting started on the warm up or what have you. Give them an opportunity or a choice perhaps to go to this reflection space where they can, maybe you have a choice board there of something, like you can write a letter to a friend, you can, I don't know, take a break or take a breather. I mean, sometimes I'm finding that kids are just hungry. Like they haven't eaten all day. Like I'm finding that the lunch line was too long, or they can't, they didn't have time in the morning to get something of food because they woke up late. So what does that look like?
So the way, when I set up my reflection center, I was so used to using learning centers for different things, because oftentimes I had those classes where I wasn't just teaching one thing. I had a couple different things going on. Like I might have, we don't have another teacher to do ELD. So you take these kids and do ELD while you're teaching this core curriculum at the same time. So so learning centers became part of my classroom, simply because that was the only way I could hit certain goals with my students. And then there were times when, the whole group, could come together and we could work that way. But because out of necessity, I had to learn more about learning centers. And so at the Reflection Center, which was a learning center of sorts, students have to be able to use their voice. And so if it's a conflict that needs to be resolved with a person, then maybe they want to journal about that. If it's a problem that they need to solve, or they feel guilty about something, they need to be able to sometimes confess that on paper just to themselves, and then think about, okay, what would be a possible solution? Because, if kids have a lot of turmoil within, we know that can throw off the dynamics of the classroom, and then nobody's learning. Everyone's distracted. Even if that student were to leave the room, kids are still talking about it. So it doesn't do any good. And so there's the journal, there's letter to yourself. So if there's a problem, what are some possible solutions? And that ties into those English standards anyway, right? Because we want them to be able to write about problem and solution. And then also, if they need an adult, I had a certain set of protocols for them. Like, do you need to go check in with me and then go see a counselor in the office? Or, right. Or do you need to talk to me one-on-one during break? Like, so different things like that were also an option, just so they would have the space to just sit there for a minute without the distraction of the rest of the class and just say, okay, this is what I need to do to move forward. And then they would just go and do that. And then
I love it, because then you're managing the behavior, you're not disrupting the flow of your class, you're giving that kid an opportunity to think and reflect and make a choice, so it's empowering. And then you can still engage.
Right. Yeah. And you know what? It's just, if they're not big writers, they can always draw, right? Like, it's a pre-writing activity, sort of. Or it's a pre-writing activity, because if it leads to writing later, then that's, that is definitely like a standards-based activity. But there's always writing involved for the most part. And so that's it. You can tie it to content standards in that way if you ever had to sort of justify it to anyone. I never really had to justify having that learning center there. Everybody was always really excited, because that just meant one less person in the dean's office. So it was usually the best way to go about it. And then, all they need sometimes is like 5-10 minutes, and then they're ready to join the group, and they're ready to dive back into curriculum. They've compartmentalized whatever it is they're going through up until, they're ready to deal with it. And so when it comes to extrinsic motivation, our externally motivated kids, so the ones who are just enamored with, oh, what do I get out of this? There's a way to start shifting them into having intrinsic motivation. And so sometimes you can use an extrinsic reward for that extrinsically motivated kid to get them to start becoming intrinsically motivated. And one of the key ways to do that is to make sure that you're being very strategic about this. Like, if the reward is, oh, you guys get like, you're the ones who can, choose the next book that you're going to read, like in your group, or you're the ones that are going to get to teach the lesson at the end of the week to the rest of the class. Whatever it is, what you want to do with that externally motivated student or extrinsically motivated student is put them in a peer group of kids who have more of that growth mindset, because then that peer model is going to be super important in terms of showing them an example of what a mastery goal oriented or growth mindset looks like in a student. And so they'll start to kind of emulate those kids. And that's one of the things we want to do in order to help them make that shift. Another way to help them make that shift is, of course, like choice. So if they're doing an independent project or a passion project, giving them the choice to do that, because then they're learning for the sake of learning. They're not really learning to gain something necessarily.
Right. One of the things we do in our class, in my math class, is they have to do a project-based learning activity. So I just was reviewing the students' work, and one student, she did a great job. She did a whole entire theme of, they got to pick their favorite movie, and then they did a whole series of math problems around their favorite movie, which was very well done. But I've seen, kids planning a camping trip and talking about area and perimeter and just empowering them. But also you get that creativity space that happens too when you're teaching with projects. They get to be creative. They get to have a choice on how their presentation looks. And typically they get to work with a friend of a choice, which is always empowering. But I think the curriculum also does matter, right? Because if you're just doing a worksheet every single day, you're not going to get a lot of buy-in from your students to want to learn the concept, to want to really feel empowered about what they're doing.
Yes, definitely. And, instruction really needs to include tasks that are worthy of their motivation.
Mm-hmm.
So if we want them to be motivated for momentum, we want them to have that growth mindset. We want them to be these kids who persist and they persevere, and they're growing. Like, we can't give them opportunities of learning that don't really prompt them to grow. And um, so embedding those scholarly traits into your lessons and explicitly stating them as you're going through your activity, saying, oh, this is what scholars do, therefore this is what we are going to do. Giving them choice and voice in those passion projects. I know, Dr. D, you love those. But also, there are times when, as a classroom teacher, you are the expert, you know what your kids need. And sometimes we've inherited this curriculum, that we have, right? Whatever it is,
Right.
it's inherited. Sometimes you love it, sometimes you don't, sometimes for other reasons, and sometimes you hate it for those same reasons. It just really depends, right? And so what we need to make sure we have the freedom to do is modify or supplement our instruction with things that are worthy of that level of motivation, that are going to prompt them to rise to that level of motivation. And so sometimes it means modifying the learning objectives too, because oftentimes if a learning objective is too easy or it does not intellectually stimulate them enough, then it needs to be just slightly changed. You might have a classroom full of awesome debaters, like they could just sit there and debate who was on The Voice and who's going to make it this and that till the end of time. That's great. They're talking about a show in pop culture, but what they're showing you is they're awesome debaters. So use that. So use that to adjust the learning objective. Like, okay, we're going to, instead of simply just write about this, we're going to do a persuasive assignment. We're going to do some persuasive writing with this. So I'm going to modify it that way. And then I'm going to have you guys kind of talk it out with each other. And so that could be really interesting. Adjust the rigor. Sometimes we find ourselves, especially in many California classrooms, kind of decreasing the rigor, especially lately with what we're calling the learning loss. But quite honestly, if they've lived it, it's hard to really lose it, right? It's just that there's this gap now.
Right.
And so there needs to be this learning acceleration because you can't really lose something, that you've learned. So,
yeah, I'm with you. I think that phenomenon is really giving way to setting low expectations for the kids.
Yes.
Which, and you shared, is going to lead to disruptive behavior. It's going to lead to kids adopting not mastery, but performance orientation.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, like you shared here, adjusting the rigor. You also talked about knowing your learners. I love that you brought up like thinking about like an asset-based approach to instruction. Like, oh, they love debating, so how can I build that in?
Mm-hmm.
But then thinking about, like, when I teach math, for example, thinking about where they might need some review or reteaching, and then being intentional in my design of instruction. So typically with math, I'll do a review through like a math game. We were doing something a few weeks ago on,
I love that.
I was helping a teacher, kids were struggling with algebra and they were doing factoring expressions. And I was looking at a data and I was like, well, they're struggling with what are factors and multiples and prime and composite numbers.
Mm-hmm.
So I led her through a whole series of activities using games so that the kids could review those essential skills. And by the way, I found them on YouTube. It was called
great.
Prime Time, and then the game was called Prime Time.
Mm-hmm.
And the activity I used was from a game that I play with my kids, which is called Prime Climb. And they got all the numbers from 1 to 100, and they were all the numbers were displayed as patterns so that they could look at the patterns inside each of the numbers and look for patterns. So, and that's really like higher order thinking. So the kids then had to color code the numbers that had similar patterns, and were able to identify, for example, oh, all the numbers with, these stripes are all multiples of 2. All the numbers with the zigzags are multiples of 3.
Mhm.
And all the numbers with no patterns were all prime numbers. So
Mhm.
in that point, you're
Mhm.
scaffolding, but also continuing to set high expectations. And then when we went into the lesson on factoring expressions, they were all successful.
That's great. No, that's definitely awesome because it's also showing them how to look at learning from a different perspective too, and that just brings learning so much deeper for our kids. In terms of adjusting the rigor with the accelerated learning that needs to happen now, is
Yeah.
I wouldn't. My encouragement to teachers isn't to lower the bar; it's keep the expectations where they need to be, add more scaffolding. So
Right.
add more stepping stools and ladders to get there, which might mean that it might take you a little bit longer because you're doing all this extra stuff, but you will still go faster than you would if you're teaching to a learning loss versus the mindset of, oh, we're going to accelerate our learning goal. So um, uh, one of the ways to increase engagement that I want to throw out there is study your students. Figure out what they like, what things really motivate them, and get them engaged. One year I had a class that loved BET. They watched MTV. They loved BET. Um, at lunch, you would find them out on the yard recreating dances that they would see.
Wow.
And I thought, you know what, that's really useful. I think we could probably create some dances in the classroom that have to do with these strategies that are really difficult for them to learn. And so I asked a few of these students to come inside during one of their lunch breaks, and I asked them, I need your help. I need to teach the class how to do a few of these fun dance moves. Like the clown walk was one of them, and the Harlem Shake was another.
Oh my God.
And I said we need to learn these skills. And so we need songs and dance to go with each skill. And so this is how this skill works. Now, how would you put that in a song? And what moves can we add to that? And so then we started to do that in the classroom with the other kids, and it was a lot of fun. There were times when they would learn a song and a dance for the first time that had to do with a certain skill, and I had 98% of the kids just get it right on the first shot. And not just the song and dance, but the actual application of the skill, because that was something from their background that really resonated with them. It was an engagement strategy that really resonated. And
Right.
so, so study who they are, figure out what they like, and then use that. That is your go-to.
Yeah, I see a lot of teachers doing TikTok now because their kids are on TikTok.
Yes. I was on TikTok for a while. I'm not ashamed to admit it. So I know we still have a couple minutes left, but what I wanted to encourage your teachers to do, whether they're watching it live or watching a recording, is you have until Sunday night to do this. If you could go onto any one of those social media platforms, that would be like Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or Twitter, or LinkedIn. That's the other one. So there's 5. And just write out or just text, just post an actionable step that you've heard tonight that you want to make sure that you're going to use in the classroom when you're back from spring break or whenever. I'm going to enter your name into a raffle and give you one of these t-shirts. So I will be in touch with you, and you can tell me which one you want and what size works best. And then there's a QR code if you would like a shirt and you don't want to wait to see if you win a raffle. You can go to this QR code and get one.
Very cool. Well, I'm going to do that. I want to do the scholar traits. I think that's phenomenal. And I
Great.
love that because I think, as we talked about, it shifts the focus from an external locus of control to internal. So having that up there is so important, you know, because I even hear from my own kids. My kids are middle schoolers now. Well, my
Mhm.
teacher doesn't like me. And I'm like, well, it's happening in the classroom. Or why would you think the teacher doesn't like you? What do you like? Where's your responsibility lie in
Mhm.
that equation? So I love that idea of having that posted or having that
Mhm.
mindset available for kiddos to really reflect on their own behaviors and actions in the classroom.
Yeah. And these days, if you're one of those teachers who roves from room to room and you don't have your own classroom, there are a couple ideas. One is if you have access to Google Classroom and you can send out reminders through Google Classroom, you can set it up so that when it comes to your lesson for that day, you're sending out that reminder through Google Classroom. And so today as scholars, we're working on this trait. And so your kids will have that when they log into their Chromebooks or devices. And then another way you can go ahead and do this if you do have technology in your room or one-to-one is have the scholarly traits used as a screensaver. And
Hmm.
so on every Chromebook, it's just on there as a screensaver. Talk to whoever you need to in IT to get that done. But it shouldn't cost anything. It just, would require some permissions being granted so that you can do that. And then I've had some teachers try to do Google Slides with it, but kind of study everything. So
Right.
some ideas.
I love it. I had a student teacher once, he did it on Instagram and then made it into a Canva. He was a music teacher and he posted it out in the classroom and it was a picture with all the kids too. So just
Yep.
getting that buy-in is so important. But it's been awesome to chat with you. Definitely, if you're on social media, I tell my students all the time, get on social media because I learned so many great ideas.
Mhm.
Hashtag Dr. Sonalina,
Mhm.
hashtag Motivate Minds for Momentum. Share your strategy for moving mindsets in your classroom. Again, we want all of our kiddos to have that mastery goal orientation and to feel like scholars every day when they leave our classroom. Thank you so much. And I'm assuming you're available for coaching. So if we need some coaching, we can get in touch with you too.
Yes, absolutely. I am on a number of different, what I can do is send you, my website is really easy. It's www.drsonalina.com. So you can
Awesome.
definitely contact me that way. So,
Check out the comments of the video and I will be sharing Dr. Sonalina's information. So if you're watching, thanks so much for joining us on another
thank
episode of
you.
Teacher Prep. And Dr. Sonalina, I hope to have you back on the show soon, learning more ways we can motivate and get our students to adopt a mastery goal orientation.
That would be awesome. So thank you so much. Thank you to all your teachers and keep doing the good work. You are worth it and your kids are worth it. So.
Absolutely. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.